Welcome. You are listening to Sharegiving Secrets with Deborah Greenhut. If you are a family caregiver or expect to be one, and you want to maintain your well-being while caring, then you are in the right place. I am your host, Deborah Greenhut, speaker, author, and rational caregiver advocate. I'm a family caregiving veteran, bringing you survival secrets and experiences from experts who share the goal of doing less by managing more. We need to invent and reinvent family care, and together we're going to do it. My big idea is rational caregiving, and my motto is, let your brain lead your heart. Please share yours in the comments. Sharegiving Secrets, because friends don't let friends be caregivers alone. Let's do this. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here at the Sharegiving Secret again. My guest today is author Tony Stewart, and I am really looking forward to this interview about his caregiving and authorship experiences. Tony, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Debbie. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you. Now, I want to get right into it. You have said that there was a moment when everything changed for you. The phone call, for example, that ushered you and Lynn, your wife, into the cancer world. Could you share that moment with us? What was that like?
Sure. It was, I don't think we realized when it started just how this was going to shift everything. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting exactly where I'm sitting now, recording this interview, but it was my home office desk, and Lynn was across the hall. Um, and she had had issues, but none of we didn't think they were cancer. She had had like gastric issues and had been to some doctors, and finally someone had ordered a scan of her back because a tiny little pain was developing that had become really annoying, which no one thought was important. And the phone rang, and I could hear her voice tighten as she answered and said, "Oh, hi, Dr. Weinstein, on a Sunday afternoon." And he called to tell her that she had tumors, that this MRI had shown not only that she had tumors in her back, but that it could see right through, and there was evidence of something that was probably tumors in her lung. And it did turn out to be stage 4 metastasized non-smoker's lung cancer, for which the only symptoms had been gastric distress for a few months. No one had ever considered her lungs or even scanning her upper body. Um, that shook us to the core. At first, we were just stunned. She just wanted to call her sister, and it was Sunday afternoon. I usually went swimming, so she said, "You go," and I went to the swimming pool and swam like crazy, probably with adrenaline and twice as much fear and effort as usual. And I came back, and the thing I most remember about that day is that although for the entire 30 years of our marriage up till that point we had not been very romantic in the traditional sense, totally loved each other, we spent that evening sitting together, holding hands, and telling each other how much we loved each other. Because suddenly there was this possibility that it was all going to end. It wasn't, we didn't know for sure that it was stage 4 incurable cancer. It was just like he said, you need to see an oncologist right away. But we know what those words might mean. And the outpouring of, wow, you mean so much to me, these words coming out of my mouth that we just never, we didn't give each other Valentine's Day gifts. We hardly gave each other Christmas gifts. We just weren't those kind of people. We traveled together. We loved each other. We just called each other our best friend. And now we sat there telling each other how much we loved each other again and again for several hours. That's what I remember about that day.
Wow, so it wasn't simply a diagnosis that changed everything, but suddenly all of the emotions came tumbling out that were unspoken before, but obviously very much felt.
Yes.
Could you let us know a bit more about Lynn, for people who are meeting this character who is also in your book for the first time? And she's not just a character, she's a human being. How would you describe her? For example, what made Lynn uniquely Lynn in the years that you were caring for her?
Lynn, um, Lynn was unusual on almost any basis. She was a painter. She paints still lives. Her specialty was still lives, and those who get to see this interview, if you see either the interview or a clip over my shoulder, or several of her paintings, but they were completely out of fashion throughout almost her entire painting career. She had a gallery. She did sell some of these paintings, but was never going to be rich or famous or anything like that. And yet it was her passion. She also had a wicked sense of humor. Um, and a very unusual dress style. We weren't like quote in or hip or whatever the right adjective would be, for the art market. Like, yeah, we were in this part of the world of people who make art because they have to make art because they live to make art, and I loved her for that. I had more traditional jobs and made more of the money. She did have a day jobs. We couldn't live entirely on my income. Um, but she many times said, like, I'm sorry that you have to do this for me, that I can't contribute my share. And on the contrary, I would tell her again and again, you're giving me a gift that money can't buy. I'm living with someone who is creating things. And she had that smile and that spirit and that drive to create. So obviously I could talk for 2 or 3 hours, but I don't think we have that much time.
Wow, that is a lovely expression of this extraordinary person who has passed from the earth too soon.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about your background, because I know there's a little creativity in there, if I'm not mistaken, that you're hiding right now. So before we even get to the book, which is another form of creativity, what were
Mm.
you doing before all this happened?
Well, if we at the time this happened, I was already in my 60s and had a long career. Um, right out of college, I was a filmmaker, and I always did want. I wanted to be creative. I made films for 8 or 10 years out of college, and also wrote a novel but I didn't manage to get it published. So, in the very traditional sense, I started out thinking, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write books and make movies. And I wasn't making enough money at movies to pay all the bills, and fell in love with computers. And I then spent 30 or so years more of my career working with businesses, writing software. I designed some software that did spectacularly well. I was never rich. I don't mean it did well like in the sense that I became a mogul or anything, but it was really used by some of the biggest organizations in the world that used that kind of thing. I was very happy with it. And then at the end of my career, I actually, and this isn't in my official bio, I went to work for an organization that takes care of mentally ill teenagers with behavioral problems. I got kind of tired of the normal business world that I had been in, and through a friend who was the executive director, he actually recruited me and said, I mean, I knew nothing about taking care of mentally ill children, but he recruited me into sort of the managing of projects and helping to run the organization behind the scenes. And that's what I was doing when Lynn got sick. Funny thing, I met Lynn more or less at the end of my 20s. When we first started dating, I was a filmmaker, and within a year, I had switched and was starting to write software. And with a big twinkle, she accused me many times of bait and switch. Here she thought she'd fallen for an artist, and there I had become a software guy. But
It sounds like you never completely abandoned the idea of telling people stories, which is a large part of making a film, whether it's fiction or not. And that really brings me to your book. And I see if you're watching on YouTube, there's a copy of the book right behind Tony on the shelf there. It's called Carrying the Tiger. And that's a really interesting title. Could you share a bit about what created that title in your mind? I think there was an angle about Tai Chi.
yes,
Talk
yes.
about that. Hear that?
Neither Lynn nor I practiced Tai Chi, but about a month into our journey, when after we had gone public with our friends, she got an email from a friend, basically saying who had been following along with the twists and turns of our story, which were rather dramatic. That first few months was amazing. Anyway, she got an email from a friend who said, "In my Tai Chi group, we carry tigers to help people that we know who are facing difficult circumstances." She said, "The three motions of bending low, picking up the tiger, and putting it on a hilltop far away make that tiger much less threatening." And Lynn wrote back to her saying, "Thank you so much. Would you please carry some tigers for me? And also, would you teach me how to carry tigers?" And
Wow.
that, almost 10 years later, when I was writing the book, came back to me as the perfect metaphor for what it was like. First, for the two of us to learn to live with cancer, and for me to try and help Lynn. And then when we went through hospice, what that was like, and helping her have a good death, if that's the right phrase. It was a beautiful experience I think, for both of us. And then the third phase of the book, where I'm facing my grief and trying to come out of my grief. And I just feel like every one of these stages of going through what it's like to have this kind of diagnosis come and change your whole life and then live through it, and me as the partner to still be alive after she died, each one of those was a different tiger that we needed to learn to carry.
Hmm. So it's kind of like a trek, but you're pushing off the sadness into the future, lifting it further so that you can get to the next bridge.
The
And
sadness or the fear or the exhaustion.
yeah,
And there's so much involved.
yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
sure there are some moments where there's cause for optimism sometimes that turns out maybe not to be long-lived, but that's another phase of the journey of caring. Speaking of caring, you mentioned a service that I've only recently become acquainted with, but maybe you can talk a little more about it, called the caringbridge. Can
Hmm.
you describe how that was helpful to you? And first of all, what was that?
And still is. It's a website and an organization, caringbridge.org. I'm a huge fan of it. Within a few days after we got that first phone call, Lynn was very public with her friends, very open with her friends. It never occurred to her to keep her diagnosis secret, which I know some people feel like, I don't know what it is. Some people don't share. Some people don't want to burden their friends. Lynn wanted to let her friends know, but she had a lot of friends. And we started having all these emails going back and forth just when we were racing out to find the right doctor, pick the right treatment. The days were very busy. And we were getting swamped by this. So someone suggested, some friend of ours, I wish I remembered who, said, there's this thing called Caringbridge, and it's like a stripped down social media, Facebook, a very simple version of a Facebook kind of thing. And you can limit it to your friends. And you could post these things you're sending out as emails, you could make them posts on Caringbridge, and then your friends will sign up and read them, and then they can write comments and click the heart button and things like that. And it's so much simpler. And we started doing that about 5 days in. And the first thing I did was basically post copies of the emails that we had already written. And that saved our lives. We wrote on Caringbridge throughout the entire process. Actually, I did almost all of the writing. Lynn asked me to do the writing, but she would sit next to me. It's like she couldn't quite bring herself to write the words. Only a few posts by her, but she was very much part of the process, and she would sit right next to me, and I would write a description of what we learned that day or what happened that day, and she would have me take out small parts and say, I'm not comfortable saying that, and then we would edit it, post it, and then we would sit there and wait for the responses to come in, and keep refreshing the screen, which didn't auto refresh the way things like Facebook do auto refresh now. And over the next few hours, we would get these wonderful messages back, which gave us so much strength and support. And also sometimes actual suggestions, because you have, if you have some friends who've been down these paths before or dealt with pain meds before or whatever, we would write a post talking about, say, a procedure we were thinking of.
Mhm.
And then some of our friends would write back and say, this is what happened to me. And it was fantastically useful. And then, as the final twist to this story, I got addicted to writing these posts. I kept journaling even as Lynn was going through hospice and dying and in my grief. And they became the core material of Carrying the Tiger. If I didn't, if I hadn't written all of that, those posts, if I hadn't done all that journaling, which I'd never before done in my life, I wouldn't have been able to write the book the way it is. Because they gave me, when I looked back, this record of 10 years of this happened and then that happened. And then we didn't just write what happened, we also wrote about what it felt like. And the book isn't only a list of things that happened. It's very much, what's it like to go through this? What does it feel like? How did we cope with that? How did we make the decisions? I found that really interesting. And there was all this information, and that is what became Carrying the Tiger.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You didn't have to remember everything, and it makes a beautiful record. I also found it helpful. Sometimes I didn't know what to say to my relative. I was just no words were coming because I was
Hmm.
grief-stricken during the procedures. And reading what other people said helped me to get back into the purpose that I was there for, which was to write to the person, not to absorb all of this and make it my problem. It wasn't. So it's nice to have the community doing this so that you can learn from other people how to celebrate, how to grieve, how to appreciate
Yes.
what is going on. And I noted that one of your goals was to normalize everything, including all the messy parts of this. Why is it so important to do that?
I felt it was important to me because I spent much of those years, and I should say Lynn did live for 5 years after that initial diagnosis. There was 5 years of ins and outs of cancer treatment and caregiving on my part. During so many things happened that at first I was reluctant to share with my friends because they embarrassed me. And this is not, I mean, the initial, which is physical, was how some of the drugs gave Lynn diarrhea, and she actually had diarrhea uncontrollably, like in a public place. I mean, she got into the bathroom, but it was pretty horrible. Um, and at first we didn't want to share that because it's just like, oh, that's messy and yucky. And then when I did share it, people wrote comments saying, thank you so much for telling us what's really going on. And then there were things that were emotional. There were the conflicted feelings I was having. The as her caregiver and best friend and husband, the whole first year I couldn't admit to her or to anyone else when I would have thoughts like, maybe it would be better if she died sooner rather than later because this is horribly difficult. This is so hard. And when I finally did share those thoughts, and I shared those first with Lynn, I should say, before I ever wrote them, I had a kind of a breakdown actually, and found myself sobbing and finally letting this out. She gave me support. And then when I eventually wrote about it, other people gave me support. And I realized we're all going through versions of this. Everyone who's going through a major, scary caregiving or health scare journey. Plus, in my case, it goes on the same. Everything I just said, I would say about what it felt like to be grieving,
Mhm.
and the messy emotions you have there. Everyone experiences those, and we usually keep them to ourselves because we don't want other people to feel sorry for us, or we don't, or we're just embarrassed because our society teaches us not to talk about these things.
Mhm.
But when I did, I got so much love and support back that I wanted to put as much of that as I could in the book without completely overwhelming it and turning it into some kind of messy, difficult read. I mean, I knew, there's joy in the book too, and there's love and there are good events. But I wanted to share that all of those things happened to me so that when someone else is reading the book, and they won't have all the same things as me, but they'll have their own, they'll realize that, hey, what I'm feeling is normal. Don't layer, it's hard enough to feel these things. Don't layer on top of that a need to be private about it or to hide it. And in fact, I wanted to demonstrate that, at least in my case, in our case, when we let our friends know about some of this stuff, the rewards were huge. We got back so much help and love and support and strength from letting them know. And if we'd kept it secret, we'd just be living with that and shuffling through the world and not have gotten all of that support. So that's what I meant.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think so often we're tempted to keep it all in, feeling we don't want to burden our friends, and yet then we feel deprived because we're not getting that support back. Along those lines, what kind of support really makes a difference when you're a caregiver? What would you recommend friends do or say that would be best?
Well, several things, and bear in mind, I'm speaking only from my own personal experience. Everyone's life is different, and in our case, we didn't have some of the challenges that people have. We didn't have small children or to take care of. We only had to deal with this issue. The two or three things that were most important to me. One was finding, in my case, after I had the breakdown, I got a therapist.
Mhm.
Now, this is a mini breakdown. It was one day of sobbing and letting it all out, but it was followed a year of everything getting harder and harder. And Lynn said to me very clearly, because this is when I said things to her like, maybe it'd be better if you died sooner rather than later. She said, you need someone you can say these sorts of things to other than me.
Mhm.
Obviously, neither of us really wanted me saying that to her all the time, and whatever came up. And so I got a therapist. Luckily, I had insurance that covered it. It doesn't have to be a therapist. But the narrow version of that is I found a therapist and I shared things that I was not able to share with Lynn because I didn't want to hurt her or our relationship. The bigger was the caring bridge in our case. The being open with our friends made such a difference. But also just sort of the basic, I was pushing too hard for the whole first year. I wasn't getting enough sleep. I wasn't taking care of me because I was focused so much on taking care of Lynn. And if you read Carrying the Tiger, you'll see that there was just this tremendous numbers of ups and downs in the first year, operations that went wrong, things like that, that we had to deal with. And so, although I don't think there's a magic bullet for this, you need to take care of yourself. You need to pay attention to how much sleep you're getting, to how much you're giving yourself things that you can do where you're not spending every single second focused on helping your partner, and where you get out and do things for yourself. I did have a job during all of that time. Uh, and sometimes that was really good, and sometimes that was really hard. Good as in it gave me something else to think about and take me away, and hard as in, oh my God, there are only so many hours in the day, and Lynn's in the hospital, and I want to be there, and I want to be here, and that was very hard. And then you come back to how the heck do you get enough sleep? You have to sometimes say no to one thing or another, because if you don't give yourself enough sleep and maybe exercise or whatever you need, just walks, open air, nature, if you don't give yourself enough of that, you can't be a good caregiver.
I
So,
think that that's hard to accept for many of us because we think if I could just do everything, everything would work out all right. But that's not necessarily true, especially if you're exhausted and can't hold yourself together while you're trying to care for someone else, or you
yeah,
get sick. A lot of caregivers don't think about, well, if I'm not here, who is going to do it? If you have become a solo act, which happens in many families.
yes. In my case, I had a series of accidents towards the end of that year,
Mhm.
which all I mean, I share the specific stories in the book, but I think every one of them comes back to my being distracted, exhausted, not really paying attention to what I was doing. And they were all my body's way of saying to me, you can't keep going like this.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and other things I found started to malfunction too. Cars, kitchen appliances, all the things I used to maintain and be precise about. A lot of that just went by the wayside. So there were situations where I didn't have what I needed, and that was
Mhm.
because I couldn't keep up with maintaining what I had. So all of
Yeah,
that, very much to the nth degree.
yeah.
Now there's one phase of caregiving, and we don't always count it as one. Some caregivers who speak about it often call it the fifth phase. It might be sixth or seventh for you, for some of us, but the grieving part
Mm.
after the hands-on caregiving ends, there's another phase, and because we have so many problems speaking about grief in our culture, I think still it's not something a caregiver can always process very well. So could you talk about that experience for you and things you did to help yourself get through phase five?
Sure, absolutely. And first, I would just say that for many of us, if it's a terminal illness, you start grieving anticipatory grief. You don't even really realize it way before your partner dies. You both are experiencing it. But then Lynn died. The first few months, in my case, and I think this is common for many people, were shattering, disorienting. I couldn't get anything done. I did take a leave from work for about a month, and I was lucky that they were willing to give me that time. Um, but I was stumbling around the house. The only things I managed to get done basically were the things that had to be done, having to do with like Lynn's estate and the memorial service and stuff like that. And in fact, I loved doing that um, because it gave me a focus and it was about Lynn. The Where it started to come together for me, and I think part of this may be because I was writing the Caringbridge posts, which almost no one would be doing at
Mhm.
that point. Um, I was thinking about like, what am I going to say in the post tonight? It had become really important to me to communicate with my friends. And I think that that's one thing that's true for many, many, many grieving people is that like if you know someone who's grieving and can give them a chance to talk about the person they lost, this is a huge gift without asking anything of them, just to give them an opportunity. I was writing about what Lynn had meant to me, and I was writing about what this felt like. And that caused me to start to consciously think, how can I get out of this? And one thing that worked really well for me out of this fog, everything making me cry, I was sobbing many times a day. I could not finish vacuuming or Swiffering the house. I would, there's an anecdote in the book that like I start and 3 hours later I find the vacuum cleaner sitting in the middle of the living room and I don't even remember when I put it down or the broom or whatever. I found that just looking at Lynn's photographs in order to prepare for the memorial service was huge for me. And I consciously tried to remember when we had been happy. So, which was really, really, really hard. And it took me days and days to go through all these photos. I made a slideshow. I used to be a filmmaker. Of course, I made a slideshow for the memorial service.
Mhm.
And at first, when I looked at the photos, every one of them just would make me sob. I would look at a photo and then have to walk away from it for like 5 minutes because that moment, that smile, that vacation was never going to be come back. But I somehow thought I need to try and turn this into something positive. Oh, it was because someone had written in Caringbridge. It's because one of my friends who had been through grief ahead of me had written in Caringbridge, it's horrible now, but eventually these same memories will make you smile. So I had read that sentence in Caringbridge and thought, can I make that happen? And I just want to say, no, I did not magically solve that problem. But I kept trying to think as I looked at these photos, I kept trying to remember the moment we took the photo. And again, within a few hours or maybe the next day, I could come back and look at the same photo and smile. This does not mean I was smiling all day long. Lynn had only been gone maybe 6 weeks at this point as I was preparing the slides, but it was a huge shift. I started to understand that someday these same memories that are killing me, that are just making me double over in grief and sobs, will be happy. And for me, that was a watershed. It took several years to actually get to the point that most of my memories make me smile and I only occasionally cry. Lynn died almost 5 years ago now, just to put this in context. Um, but that was the beginning. I don't know if I answered your question. I told a very long story about a very narrow aspect that may not apply to other people, but that's when I think back at how much that mattered to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful because, well, when I was caring for my parents at first, I none of my friends were in the same boat. I was in my mid 40s, and I knew my mom and dad were not well, and they were 10 years apart, and my dad was older by 10
Hmm.
years, but we had no way of knowing who it would be first, but it was beginning to look like one of them would be soon.
Wow.
And I had no one to really talk about that with. And my husband hadn't experienced that yet, even though he was older than I. His parents lived well into their 90s. So it was a long time before we had to face that. And I remember, not, oh, I was just completely adrift at first. And then my mother died suddenly, and my dad was very confused and upset, didn't know
Yes.
what to do with himself. And I didn't think I didn't think it would be broken heart syndrome that took him. Somehow I wasn't prepared for that it would
Mm.
be so soon, only a couple of months after my mom. And I understand that feeling of devastation. I just for months could not function very well at all, but was doing all of the estate work and the other things. And that I could do. I could put myself on autopilot and make that work. And some of it was soothing because at least there was a reason for doing it, where there was no reason for anyone to die, as far as
Right, right.
I'm concerned. And the
And outwardly, presumably, your friends would think, oh, you're doing so well. Oh, look how well you're coping. You're getting all of these things done.
Yeah, they weren't sure what to say because it had not happened to most of them. One or two had lost a parent earlier, but it was a different circumstance. So, but the thing I missed the most and what really brought the tears always was that I had no recording of my mother's voice that I could find because this was well 30 years ago that they passed, and we had some films and I couldn't work the projector, and it was just too complicated. And until I got that, one of my cousins had put onto a cassette, I guess, or a CD for me, a video that had been taken at one of my father's birthday parties. So I had them all finally, and
Mm.
that was soothing to hear them again because it was just such a big disconnect at first.
Yes. And in my case, um, I don't know why neither Lynn nor I had any videos. A friend has sent me since then these tiny fragments. I mean, literally, they were like accidental 2-second clips of Lynn at a party. But I suddenly, after she died, suddenly thought, oh my God, I have to grab those voicemails. And I went and I have 4 voicemails of things like, hi, cutie, I'm at the farmer's market. Would you like me to get some eggplant? I mean, that sort of thing. And I saved those 4 that I had, and I played them again and again and again.
Yeah,
I would watch the slideshow and I would play those voicemails to bring her back to me.
yeah. And I think about the thousands of little videos my parents took of my kids, and they had all of their voices, but
Yeah.
I just didn't have anything to listen to, and that meant as you say, that's just so important. Even a mundane voicemail is a record of who that person was and
Yeah.
sounded like. So important.
My mother is now in her mid 90s and declining. I should say how lucky I am that I have a mother who's still alive at our age.
Mhm.
Um, but you better believe I've gone out over the last few years and taken videos of her several times, just at family events or something. She was singing a song, she was telling an anecdote. She's cognitively impaired now. I don't think I'll get much more like that, but I have them. I was planning ahead. I wasn't going to let this happen twice.
Yeah, all it takes is once, and then you do what you can to preserve the rest. Um, what's the what is the thing you hope that caregivers will carry away from reading Carrying the Tiger? What's the important thing for you?
I think there are two or three things. The one we already talked about at great length, and which was the single biggest reason I wrote the book, was to show people that whatever they're going through is normal, to normalize it all, and to give people views of how Lynn and I found moments of joy, and how if you can somehow not be crippled by the fear and just take things one step at a time, there's so much life and love and happiness that you can experience, even in the midst of this incredibly difficult process. And yes, there were periods when Lynn was in the hospital and she had hospital delirium and didn't seem to be herself, when I can't say that I got a lot of joy or that she did. I'm not saying that this happened every day. But then there were those moments when we just held hands and looked at some buds coming out in the spring, and you realize that we were appreciating life in ways we never had before. And I think that's because we just took this as all part of life. And the question is, what can I do? What can we do to make the best of this? And that's so I wrote the book hoping that you could watch what Lynn and I did, and then what I did during my grief, to find ways to make the best of these very difficult but very human and normal situations, in hopes that whoever's reading the book will be able to map their own personal situation and experience onto it and get some inspiration and get some help, get some emotional help, like, and some support from from walking with me, from me walking with them in a sense.
That's a lovely invitation to your readers. And I think I would love to end on this beautiful grace note that we've gotten to. But before we end, I want to make sure that listeners can find your book and follow your work. So we will certainly put all this in the show notes. But if you could share that with us right now, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. So the book is called Carrying the Tiger, and the subtitle is Living with Cancer, Dying with Grace, Finding Joy While Grieving. If you search for Carrying the Tiger on Amazon, it's right there. There's hundreds of reader reviews. That's the easiest place most people will find it. It is also available in bookstores. You'd probably have to ask for it. I don't think it's widely on the shelf, but most people are getting it from Amazon. It's in print, it's in ebook, and it's an audiobook narrated by me. I do have my own website, TonyStewartAuthor.com, from which you can easily get to all of my different social media handles. I'm on Instagram. I write stories on Substack. I just posted one the other day. But if you go to TonyStewartAuthor.com, and all the little icons are up in the header there. And I also have a newsletter, which if you go to the website, it will almost immediately say, "Hey, wouldn't you like to sign up for my newsletter?" So that's where I let people know what's going on in an ongoing way. I think that's everything.
That's great, Tony. That's a lot and a very rich set of resources that we can all turn to. And I want to thank you once again for being on my show today. Is there any last word that you'd like to leave with the audience before we close out?
I wish I had one. I think I just said most of what I wanted to say. I really appreciate the chance to talk about the book. I hope that it touches other people. Oh, I want to tell an anecdote. And if this runs too long, you can always edit it out. I received a note the other day from someone who read the book, and he found me on Instagram and direct messaged me on Instagram to say, "Thank you so much for writing this. My father died a few months ago, and I've been shattered, and I couldn't find the words. But reading Carrying the Tiger, you've given me the words. Thank you for that." And that, oh my gosh, that here I am sharing it on a podcast. I mean, that touched me so much.
Very much what an author would love to hear.
Yes.
After having suffered through the writing, and writing's not easy. So
No.
So it's good to get some of those comments at the other end of the trail. So thank you again for being my guest today, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you. I hope you'll come back at some point and tell us how it is, say 5-10 years out, on what other kinds of things that you're working on. And we look forward to hearing more from you. Thanks again, Tony Stewart.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me today on the Sharegiving Secret, How to Survive Family Caregiving. I love sharing these insights and stories to empower you on your caregiving journey. If today's conversation resonated with you, consider diving deeper by picking up a copy of my pamphlet, Non-Negotiables for Caregivers. It's filled with great strategies to help you think through how to maintain your well-being while caregiving. Nobody wants to become Carezilla, right? Visit sharegiving.net to get this resource that can help you navigate your caregiver path with grace and resilience. Let's continue to share our stories and support each other. Until next time, keep sharing, keep caring, and remember, you're not alone on this journey. Thank you.